Hi, folks. I thought we'd have a fairly unscripted ramble about Tucker Carlson's latest podcast episode, whatever he calls it, his latest show, that he's currently got pinned to his Twitter account, in which he castigates Ben Shapiro and Mark Levine, and then has Anna Kasparian on to talk about the nature of politics in the United States. Because I think this is really important. And this is it speaks to one of the reasons that I found myself becoming a huge fan of Tucker Carlson back when he was on Fox News. Because there are ways of approaching things in different levels of thought. And Tucker always pitched his, at least in his later years on Fox News. In his early years, Tucker Carlson was not manifestly different from any other conservative commentator on American TV. He had a fairly straightforward, regime-approved, what I'm going to call ideological view of things. Now, that is to say that there is a set of rational propositions that are therefore something you can derive definite certain conclusions from, and the interpretation of these things, whether you are on the left or the right. Both the left and the right have their rational propositions that anyone can pick up and derive conclusions from, and anyone of any intelligence. It doesn't require any kind of age, any kind of wisdom, any kind of experience. It just requires you to be smart enough to understand the logic of the propositions and how they infer from the premises to the conclusion. And Tucker, in his early years, was no different to any other conservative commentator. And so he had a reasonable career as being a reasonable conservative commentator. And you get people like that on the left. I mean, an example of that now are Mamdani and Polanski in Britain, who have taken the left-wing premises and without any kind of finesse or any kind of insight of their own, have just memorized the premises so sufficiently and internalized them into, I guess, what is a true belief on their part, and are just deriving the logical end conclusions. And from the left-wing position, what this does is it renders the Labour Party essentially as a party of cowards or traitors. Because they say, well, look, you said all of these things and we believe all of these things. The premises have all been laid out, and this is what morality is, a set of a priori statements. And you're capable of deriving the conclusions from these premises, but you're not. Why not? Why is there a blockage there? And the answer, of course, as I've said elsewhere, is that the Labour Party is a parliamentary party. They're, in fact, the current party of government. And so they have to actually interface with the world. They have to be concerned about second and third order consequences of their decisions. So whilst in their heart of hearts they might believe the most abstract, radical left-wing nonsense, they still are bound by reality. They're still hemmed in by their political opponents, by the consequences of their actions. Whereas Polanski, not really being a politician, but kind of a student politician he was on the London Assembly or something. I mean, what do they do? What power do they have? Is not bound by these things. So he can engage in the most extreme forms of flights of fancy. And that's why it's quite exciting to see Mamdani win, because either he's going to utterly ruin New York or he's going to completely backslide on the fancy politics of the left at the moment. Well, the right has its own version of this. And it is essentially sort of Reaganism, Thatcherism, and the sort of Buckleyite liberal conservative discourse, where it's like, yeah, we're for free markets infinitely, because free markets have, again, a priori been described as established as a good. And we are, of course, for MLK colorblindness. And we are for this being essentially projected into its infinite capacity. Whatever the consequences of this is, because it was derived from these principles, we are going to have to stand on them and say these are good consequences. And that's how you get Ben Shapiro saying, well, actually, guys, maybe you don't deserve to live in the place that you grew up if you can't afford to. And it's like, okay, that's ideological. That is a consequence that he has derived from a certain set of premises, and he is not prepared to abandon the maxims that inform these premises. So he ends up saying, yeah, you don't have any right to live in the place in which you grew up, actually. And if the system, the world around you changes sufficiently to the point where it, I don't know, floods your community with foreigners or something that pushes up rent prices and essentially prices you out of the jobs market, well, then you're just going to have to move elsewhere. You don't have any particular right to this location, which isn't very nice, actually, and it's not very appealing. And you can see why a lot of young people are like, I'm not sure I'm on board with that. But this is a product of this kind of rationalistic ideological thinking. Now, Tucker is not talking on that level. Tucker is talking about a much more human level. He is talking on the level of relations. He is talking about the connection between things. And that in that connection, you have to be concerned about many other things. You have to be concerned about honor, dignity, worthiness, and consideration. You have to say, well, what's the consideration I give to that other fellow, and what consideration am I entitled to in return? What is the character of the relation between these two things? And Ben Shapiro, in him saying, well, actually, you don't have any right to live anywhere. Okay, you've rationally derived that from your propositions. But on a human level, actually, we live in a world of relations. All of our being human is based in how we connect to other people, the place that we live in, the things that we own, and the careers that we have, and the relationship we have, the connection itself in the metaphysical relationship is the thing that actually provides not just the moral substance to our lives, but the genuine human good of our lives. So what we actually feel is right and wrong is contained really within that. And if you have this ideological view which takes the a priori presuppositions and maxims and says, no, I now, because of this suite of ideas, I get to impose upon you in a way that is damaging to these relations, or in some way keeps you down and makes you suppressed, you can see why people would say, look, I might not be able to rationally refute that which you have derived, but there must be some fault with it, because otherwise, why am I being treated in this way? Because it comes down to, what is politics for? Is politics for the fulfillment of an abstract ideological agenda, or is it to make our lives better? And if it is for making our lives better, then pursuing these ideological agendas is in conflict with the humanness that underpins what society is and our place in it. And so this is the distinction, I think, between the Mark Levines and the Ben Shapiros and the Anna Kasparians and the Tucker Carlsons. I mean, whatever you think of either group, these are just the ways in which they're operating. And so from an ideological perspective, you ignore the relations between people. You ignore the obligations you have as a fellow countryman, as a member of humanity, as someone whom you might, if you met in completely unrelated circumstances, like and become friends with. You become ideologically opposed to them because of these original premises that you have derived a conclusion, and that it blocks out any of these human concerns. It keeps it very, very rigid and very structured. And so someone like Mark Levine can be like, yeah, I don't care what happens to the Palestinian kids. Why would I care? I've determined from the premises that I'm using that they're an enemy. And Ben Shapiro can just say, I don't care what happens to American kids. I've determined from my premises that the market supersedes any of their demands or any of their concerns. And if that means they're essentially rendered landless and have to go wandering America to hopefully find a place that they can live, that's their problem, not mine. That's a thing, as he says. It's like, yeah, it's a thing, but it doesn't mean that it's inevitable. It doesn't mean it has to happen. And it doesn't mean that we have to just consent to it. Actually, there are ways of looking at this in which your ideology, Ben, is being highly destructive, and we don't have to just agree with it, especially as, and this is a point that many people are making, there appears to be an ethnic dimension to this. There is an interest group in the United States that is very concerned about a foreign country, and this is what Tucker Carlson points out in his podcast. Again, I'll talk about this podcast at length in a later video. This is just going to be fairly short. But that relational worldview is respected within that community. And the ideological worldview that has the hard edges is applied externally, outward from that community. And what Tucker Carlson and Anna Kasparian are saying is, look, actually, we deserve the same kind of consideration that that community shows to itself. And they are correct about that. They do deserve the same kind of consideration. They don't deserve to be on the hard edge of ideology when it comes to deciding, well, you just can't live here, or we just kill those people because they're part of an enemy tribe and I don't like them. That's not an acceptable way to look at the world. And when Tucker was like, look, what you're showing me is that you don't love me. You don't show any consideration from me. What he's speaking of is the relation. He's saying you're not treating me as a fellow countryman. What you're doing is applying the cold, rational, hard edge of the ideology. And just, good luck, basically. You're on your own. I don't care about you. And that's not an acceptable way to run a country, actually. All the civic polities really are built on friendship, as Aristotle observed 2,500 years ago. Actually, ideology doesn't sustain a civic polity. And that's why the Soviet Union collapsed. It was a purely ideological project. And the second that the power enforcing the ideology was broken, the whole thing shatters into a million pieces. The same thing will happen if America allows itself to become a purely ideological project. And the problem that America has is that it is, in some ways, kind of half ideology, half relational. Like, yes, it was all European peoples, or mostly European peoples, who found themselves with relationships underneath an ideology. But the ideology always reflected the culture of the Northwestern European Protestant English. And if that changes and it becomes purely an ideological construct, well, then it will end up going the way of the Soviet Union when the power that holds the ideology in place wavers or breaks. This is not conducive to a healthy country in which people actually care about one another, actually take care of themselves. And you see this all the time. And this is what I describe as the social contract society, where it's just everyone following ideological precepts without having any actual human relations connected to one another. And that's not good. It's not good to live in that. And people strive not to live in that. And that's honestly why Israel exists. It's the Jewish people saying, I don't want to live under the purely ideological construct of someone else. We want a country that belongs to us, to which we have a proper relationship. And what Tucker Carlson and Kasparian are asking for is the same for themselves. And so it's not unreasonable either for them to say, look, I actually don't want to be treated with the hard edge of power, of ideology, being wielded through the state and being and the market and whatever other way power is wielded against us, just because it can be. Actually, I think there is a better way of doing it. I think actually having a more wholesome way of doing it is having this human relational way of dealing with one another. And so when Anna is explaining, so I felt bad for smearing some journalist to her, and she just gives a public apology to him out of nowhere 5 years later because it was guilt on her mind. That's actually really nice to see. That's the same reason I apologized to Jess Phillips, because I was just like, yeah, you know what? I need to do this. It's not about them. It's about making sure that I've done my part to repair the relationship, whether it's accepted or not. It's about understanding that actually bringing more humanness back to politics and not declaring merely one side is the enemy is good. And that's why someone like Zach Polanski is actually a kind of scary figure. When you saw it on the Question Time when he was dealing with Zia Youssef, he was just instantly spitting and hissing and fascist, Nazi, evil, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, that's just the hard edge of ideology. Controlling Zach Polanski, because he's not actually got the human relations within him that Tucker is talking about. And that's not the kind of person you want in charge. That's genuinely not the kind of person you want in charge. They'll just hurt people. They'll hurt their enemies. And they'll give you a suite of ideological enemies that you will feel justified in hurting. And again, Tucker saying, look, we can't have this Amalek stuff, because we can't just have people who are intrinsically evil that must be destroyed, because we don't believe in those things. Not only, Tucker is a Christian. I imagine Anna Kasparian is a Christian or an atheist who has inherited Christian values and doesn't want to maintain this kind of constant moral war against another tribe. It's not what they're after. That's not the way they see the world, and it's not how they feel in their hearts. And this is what I think the genuine root of the schism between the sort of Tucker Carlson side and the Ben Shapiro side actually is. Like I said, I think whether you like it or not, there is an ethnic dimension to it, and there is also an ideological dimension to it. And this can't be properly understood without recognizing these things. And I think really Tucker is right that the ideological dimension is going to lose. Now, that doesn't mean that the Jewish community in America is just, that's it, it's the end of the world, it's a new genocide or anything like that. It doesn't mean anything like that. What it means is there's going to be a renegotiation of what is appropriate based on what people are entitled to, the consideration and respect they're entitled to, and the place that they ought to occupy in society. And that's not something you can do on an individual, on a group level. This will be done on an individual level based on the way that you treat people, the way that you, the services you provide, the things that you do. The content of your character will actually matter here. It won't be just X abstract category, therefore this. It won't be Y abstract category, therefore that. It won't be Z abstract category, therefore the other. It will be, this person has virtue. This person has shown himself to be a good person. This person has shown through his actions and through his goodwill and good intent that, and his good results, that he is a worthy person in society, and people will want that person to prosper. And this is what Tucker is getting at. And this is what Ben Shapiro seems to be lacking. Same with Mark Levine. And so I'm sure I'm going to be called all sorts of names under the sun for this. But I genuinely think that's what the heart of the issue is. And that really Tucker is right, that the virtuous human side of this will win, but also it kind of has to win. Nobody wants to live in an excessively ideological state. No one wants Mark Levine standing in front of what it was, the American Jewish Congress, something saying, yeah, we do cancel people, we do this, we do that, we do that. And it's like, okay, but they're not just enemies, they're also human beings, and actually they are your countrymen that you're talking about persecuting. So I think that maybe there's a bit more to have a discussion about, rather than just being an ideological browbeater on this and trying to hurt people. It's just, I think those days are coming to an end. We saw it badly enough with the left. Watching it happen on the right, I think, is deeply inappropriate. If anything, the right should be, I mean, the left abandoned this, obviously, when they became ideological socialists, but the right must start committing to a politics of relationism and humanness, and understanding that actually we're all here together in the same countries, and we have to kind of help each other. I mean, that's the point of it. We're here to be friendly to one another, to make sure that we all get ahead. And if we all cooperate, then I think we can. I actually do believe genuinely that we are almost all good people, and actually we can do good in the world if we just stop trying to tear each other apart.